So let's talk about clues. You might think that people say what they mean, but a big part of what's actually being said is nowhere to be found in the words themselves. Sentences are like a crime scene without witnesses. Nobody saw what happened, but the words that were left behind give you everything that you need to solve the mystery of meaning. The good news is, if you already speak a language, you're a veritable Sherlock Holmes. I am Moti Lieberman, and this is the Ling Space.
Welcome to the Ling Space.
So we've talked about pragmatics before, the study of how language is used in context and the assumptions that we make to understand each other. We all follow the cooperative principle, which is a number of maxims that describe how to be nice and considerate conversation partners. There are 4 basic rules that we follow and that we assume that other speakers follow all of the time. The maxims of quality, quantity, relevance, and manner. So if I tell you that during John and Mary's wedding, Sherlock noticed 3 signs, you're probably going to assume that I'm following the maxim of quantity and being as informative as I can be, meaning that he saw exactly 3. I never said exactly, but being the detective that you are, you figured out that that's exactly what I meant. But if you were just a logic bot, interpreting everything that you hear as the absolute logical truth, you wouldn't be clever enough to pick this up. Straight up logic isn't programmed to be cooperative, and so this sentence would be true even if Sherlock had seen 4 signs or 5. To LogicBot 3000, the original sentence isn't wrong, it's just kind of incomplete. Now, a conclusion that we draw from incomplete information, like the number of signs being exactly 3, is called an implicature. And because implicatures are really just deductions and not facts, that means it's possible for them to be wrong. But the thing is, even if the implicature were false, the original sentence still stays true, as long as there were at least 3 signs. This is a defining property of how facts and languages interact, and it's called cancelability. So let's say John asked Martha for some biscuits, and she said, "I'm not your housekeeper." LogicBot would have a hard time getting this because it doesn't really seem like one sentence really has much to do with the other. But because we figure that speakers obey the maxim of relevance and tend to say things that make sense, we figure that she's saying no, and is probably annoyed to boot. That's the implicature, but the evidence is always circumstantial. It's possible that she just misheard John and that her response has nothing at all to do with what he actually said. In this case, we would just have a simple misunderstanding and the implicature would turn out to be wrong. But that doesn't make the statement that she's not his housekeeper false. It's important to note that just because we can cancel implicatures doesn't mean that we usually treat them so callously. People will often reject a sentence as being untrue if it's only logically true, but pragmatically bad. So look at an experiment like this 2003 study. Researchers presented participants with a number of scenarios, like having every single horse in a scene jump over a fallen tree. Then they asked whether some of the horses leapt over the log made for a good description. Adults rejected over 92% of the inappropriate implicatures, even if they were logically true. We really do care about these things. So implicatures will usually point you in the right direction, but they can sometimes be misleading. Thankfully, words can leave behind fingerprints too, which brings us to Exhibit B, entailment. If I told you that Martha made a pot of tea, you would know for sure that she put the kettle on. This is because you understand that you can't make tea without putting the kettle on. Even LogicBot knows this. This means that the first sentence entails the second one. There's no way for the first sentence to be true while the second sentence is false. The truth of the first sentence guarantees the truth of the second one, even if the second sentence remains unsaid. And this is the kind of thing that LogicBot 3000 totally gets. Now there's lots of ways for one sentence to entail another. For example, we could swap a phrase in a sentence with its synonym, so that Greg works at Scotland Yard entails that Greg is employed at Scotland Yard and vice versa. Another way to get an entailment is to replace a specific thing with something more general. In this way, Irene as a woman entails Irene as a person. Or we could use what we know about the world, so that the scientist that knows Sherlock's secret got engaged entails Molly Hooper got engaged. Finally, we can play around with the structure of our sentences to arrive at entailment. By stripping away extra material, we can get from Sally and Philip disliked the detective to Philip disliked the detective. Or Sherlock figured out the password on the 3rd try to entail Sherlock figured out the password. The thing that all these different kinds of entailment have in common is that, unlike implicatures, they're not cancelable. There's no way that he could have figured out the password on the 3rd try if he never figured it out at all. It's a contradiction that just doesn't make sense. When it comes to entailment, the truth is always guaranteed. Now, you might be thinking that this case is closed, but we haven't even tracked down our biggest lead yet, the smoking gun of presupposition. Take the following sentence. John listened as Sherlock played the violin. We know that if this sentence is true, it must be true that Sherlock was playing the violin. After all, how could John hear something that didn't even happen? So the first sentence presupposes the second one. But what's really amazing about this is that even if we turn the sentence around and make it John didn't listen as Sherlock played the violin, we still know that Sherlock must have been playing music. Presupposition is so resilient it even survives negation. That doesn't happen with entailment. If you wanted to claim that Martha didn't make a pot of tea, that doesn't tell you anything at all about whether she put the kettle on. The entailment is broken. But presupposition is like entailment on steroids. In fact, it can even be a little too much for LogicBot to handle. If we asked, LogicBot, is it true that Sherlock's sister is a detective too? His poor robot head might explode. What we did was sneak a false presupposition into the question. Sherlock doesn't even have a sister, so it can't be true that she's a detective. Weirdly, it can't really be false either, because that would mean that he has a sister that does something other than detective work. LogicBot just can't deal with sentences that are neither true nor false. It's a bit of a paradox. So like entailment, presuppositions aren't cancelable. If we try to deny it, the truth of the sentence just becomes impossible to judge. And like entailment, there are a few different ways to trigger presupposition. One is to use the definite article, so the word the. If I say Sherlock suspects the taxi driver, that pretty much means that there has to be a taxi driver somewhere out there for it to make any kind of sense. The sentence presupposes a world in which a taxi driver exists. Another way is with certain kinds of verbs. Like when I say, the suspect admitted to using poison, he better have actually used some. Otherwise, the presupposition ends up being false, and it's hard to know exactly what it could mean. Certain adverbs trigger presuppositions too, like the word again. If Moriarty appeared again, he must have appeared at least once before. If he hadn't, the original sentence just becomes nonsense. Presupposition, together with the various flavors of entailment and implicature that we've discussed here, make up all the different kinds of extra information that our sentences carry. This isn't the kind of stuff that you can see with the naked eye, but with careful investigation it becomes elementary. When we speak, we communicate so much more than just the words that we say. And luckily, because we aren't simple robots, we can read the clues people drop to put together a compelling case. So we've reached the end of the Ling space for this week. If you manage to see this investigation through to the end, you learn that implicatures are deductions that we make about what a speaker actually means based on the assumption they're being cooperative. That implicatures are cancelable because they can turn out to be false. That an entailment means if a sentence is true, another related sentence will also be true. And that sentences with presuppositions require that some background information already be established, and they can even survive negation. The Ling Space is produced by me, Moti Lieberman, and directed by Delelise Prévost. This week's episode was written by Stéphane Herdevies. Our editor is Georges Coulombe, our music and sound design is by Shane Turner, and our graphics team is Atelier Muse. We're down in the comments below, or you can bring the discussion back over to our website where we'll have some extra material on this topic. Check us out on Tumblr, Twitter, and Facebook, and if you want to keep expanding your own personal Ling Space, please subscribe. And we'll see you next Wednesday. Fier Melengue!